Hi, everyone. This is JaneTaff the Sage.
And Deanna Vestal, your career catalyst.
And welcome to another episode of the Lipstick Leadership Legacy Podcast. We are here today with a beautiful guest, Shaline Jane. Hi, Shaline. How are you?
Hi, I'm thankful to be here, and I'm blessed.
Awesome. We are so glad you joined us. And you are another guest from our infamous book discussion from last month. And we are here discussing our new topic of the month, also based on our book discussion, which is Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And we were talking before our recording today about who we are and why we do what we do. And so I want to pace our listeners through getting to know you a little bit and then get into why do you do what you do. So Shaline, tell us a little bit about yourself professionally, personally. Tell us about you so we can get to know you a little bit.
Well, I am pretty much raised in Northern California and from the Bay Area to Sacramento. I'm a two-time beauty pageant winner. I ran a small business since I was 18 years old. And I just have been in love with leadership roles in my community and making a positive impact in my community. And I've always been an activist and helping bring resources to the community and really bridging gaps and bridging communities together with resources so we can propel the next generation forward and really work together to solve problems. And so I've always had my heart on my sleeves, a workaholic in a good way, and really just someone that loves to be a part of a community and community involvement. I got my associate's degree in political science in Southern California. I'm a single mom to a wonderful 9-year-old boy. And I've always been in finance and business and consulting. And now I've actually been working in ministry. So it's been a wonderful journey to this point.
Wow, that's a lot about you in a short period of time. I love it. That was a very, very good Reader's Digest version about who you are and your background. So tell us about what you are passionate about, because we had a great conversation right before this. So say that again for our listeners to hear.
I've been really passionate about the next generation. I think being an active participant of life and just keeping my heart open to the groans of the world in a sense. I really would love to, I'm big on values and virtues and building great character in our next generation. They call the next generation the lost generation. And I really feel that the giants in the industry and the leaders in our industries are at that time where they're retiring, they're moving on to the next stage of their life, and they're really looking to pass the baton to qualified, competent, emotionally intelligent leaders. And so it's like my generation and before me. And so I feel like, well, how can I lead better? How can I connect better with the next generation so then we can instill those great values and virtues, because integrity is huge. And I think that we're losing a lot of those principles and values in our next generation just because you have a lot of parents working constantly. They're not available to be there at the dinner table like we used to. It's not like the old fashioned days when you sat around a dinner table and talked about the day and talked about how to become better in your character and solving problems or issues of life. Mm-hmm. So how do we do that in a generation that's social media driven and really where everyone's on their phone and not connecting and having interpersonal skills or emotional intelligence being taught to them, and we're isolated more.
Yeah, you are absolutely right about that. Being the generation that is raising the next generation like you are, we should be concerned. Now, I'm curious. Tell me a little bit about this label, the lost generation. I've never heard that. So tell me a little bit about how you heard that, what that means by that individual's definition. What does that mean? And how did it strike you that way?
Well, Generation X and Z, I got that term from my cultural awareness classes that I took in sociology, and just really seeing how they call it the lost generation because we're more information driven with the internet that came along. We're disconnected interpersonally. So a lot of us are really have learned through whatever's coming through our phones. And lost meaning like there's so much, we're inundated with so much information that we get lost in that information and we don't build quality relationships. We don't get to interact with it, you know, other people that allows us to build connection and also allows us to learn how to work well with one another. And you don't build that emotional intelligence. You don't build the connections or the experiences to be able to say, hey, how can I build better character? Or I'm having challenges. How do I work through these challenges with these individuals? Nowadays, it's more like, hey, I don't need to talk to you. I can just block you. You can just text me. You can just message me. And we don't actually have a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now I understand what you're saying. So it's really lost connection, that point of where we are doing person to person type interactions. That's
Right.
really lost.
Yeah.
So Deanna, jump in here. I know you're interested in, you know, we all are, but intergenerational communication, how that's been lost with our next generation. So what do you think about that?
Absolutely. I agree with the points of advocacy where we know what's going on and we can have a heart for it on paper, but it's in the activity of everyday living that we make sure to spend just a little bit more time with the younger generation. And ways that we do that also are different than the ways that were done with us, where we are really being charged to ask our spheres of influence of another generation younger than us, how they're doing, what they've been doing, and not give up when they give one-word answers. So before it was typical of a teenager to be kind of moody or whatever, whereas now technology is playing a huge part in the lost art of communication. And so with more access to information, it's weird how it ends up shutting down the communication centers for real life contact. And that's where we come in. So even with myself, or with the two of us and Jane and Shaline, for a perfect example, here we have an opportunity to really connect with her. And when we're finding out more about what she's got going on and that she has a child, we can really dig in and ask her more about her parenting experience and activities that they do together. Just in that alone, it sparks creativity for maybe her and her journey and experience, and maybe even exposes her to a new generation of friends. Mm-hmm. So I'm really passionate about intergenerational communication, the art of listening as a skill, because in my age range, we were not taught that. Children were to be seen and not heard. And I absolutely came from, one of those arm pinching families where talking too much got a little nudge in a painful way to hush it. And so that influence takes a lot of practice. It takes the integration of not just having connections and deep roots with people in our younger generation, but really taking the time to ask those lifestyle questions and listening. So it's a treasure to be part of this conversation and talk about the many facets of what you've got going on, Shaline, but especially that you trust and believe in intergenerational communication. What do you think, Jane?
I've thought about this particular topic quite a while, and it's funny because I grew up, I'm Gen X, and I raised Gen Y, Gen Z kids. And so what's really interesting for me is, like you, Deanna, I was raised in the seen, partially though, seen and not heard generation, but I was also the only child. And so they would communicate with me like another adult. And so I wasn't really seen as a child most of the time. And I was able to speak and converse with the adults in my household because I had a multi-generational household, not just my mom, but my grandparents too, and a whole slew of aunts and uncles that lived very, very close by. So I was treated and spoken to as an adult. So I ended up having the conversational skills, the ability to sit and listen patiently because you never interrupt an elder, and but I was fully invited and engaged in conversation with my aunts and uncles who were kind of young, and so I had that, and my cousins, they were a little bit different because they weren't only children, they were treated as children. And so I had a stranger upbringing than most children of my age, but I think I grew up that non-traditional, so I wanted to instill more traditional family hierarchy, which is funny. I wanted my child to know, or my children to know, that they were children. They could play, they needed to learn patience in conversation, they have to wait their turn or include it in the conversation to engage, not just blurt out whatever they want. And they learned a lot of personal control because I was not going to just let them talk out of turn, which for me, it wasn't instilled. So, but it made me comfortable around so many different generations. So funny enough, I took a different tact when it came to including my children in how we had conversations. If my husband and I are talking to each other, they are not allowed to just interrupt. They have to say, "Excuse me, can I?" And but it's not in a punitive way. I think the big difference between how our generation raises children to interact or communicate, it's not punitive if you make a mistake. You simply correct and move on, right? Whereas our generation, it was very punitive. You got spanked, you got pinched, you got hushed somehow, and it was not pleasant. So that to say the very least, right? And our generation learned we have other techniques we can use that have nothing to do with pain. It's correction, and so that's kind of the take I've had. But it's interesting, Shaline and Deanna, you both mentioned not being able to have communication, right? Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't always allowed to speak in my household. But when I was, it was so inviting. It was very mentally stimulating. And it definitely was not on a child level. My grandparents did not entertain any childlike talk in the household. So they spoke to me as if I understood all the higher concepts of being an adult. And they would talk about culture and things about being Asian, Filipino, growing up in multiple generations, and they would talk about experiences and the war, and I had to patiently sit there until I could ask a question that was meaningful to them. I was curious, but it was more meaningful to them. And so I learned the subtle art of speaking to expose a little bit more about the conversation so that the speaker feels really good about the listener, who was me. Very, very subtle, but I think a completely lost art, because isn't it true, if you really think about it, isn't that what you were taught to do? If you are in the seen and not heard category, where you are permitted to be heard if you have a meaningful question for the speaker, not a silly question because it popped into your head. Right. And so I learned the subtlety of that particular technique, and it's really helped me as an adult because I didn't have to learn that very, very difficult skill. And so that's kind of my take on it. But I do feel that children don't get enough enough practice for all the reasons you mentioned, Shaline, we're very distracted as
Oh,
as
yeah.
a generation. So what do you propose, Shaline, though? Because we pose the problem really well. So what would be some ideas, or you've worked with organizations that are obviously working really hard on addressing this issue. So what have been some creative, innovative, or just, back to basics ideas that you've heard to combat this issue?
I agree with Deanna about just asking better questions and engaging in conversation with our younger generation. I also believe that we should be encouraging our younger generation to really step out of their comfort zone. I know for me, growing up, I was very vocal as being an Asian, female, and I got in trouble for it a lot at home, but I used it more in my leadership skills at school. I ran for every student leadership position since third grade. I was the kid that ran for president in every student government position all the way to college, which led me to serve on boards of organizations in my career. And I think that allowing myself to know that I was valuable or that I could make a difference really encouraged me, and surrounding yourself with wisdom. I think it's just, with leaders. So encouraging our younger generation to step out of their comfort zone, to be able to engage with elders or people in our community that, hold leadership positions. I sat at the feet of wisdom for many years with a servitude heart. And I think that a lot of times, most people are shy in the sense of taking on a leadership position or not feeling that they're adequate enough to serve. And to me, I really felt like it was an honor to serve. It was an honor to volunteer. I get to do this. I get this opportunity to make a difference at this event or community event or even just a roundtable discussion. And so I think with having that attitude of gratitude, being proactive in your life to really seek out wise counsel or wise leadership to learn from is really needed, where you really have to put your ego and your pride aside. And I encourage us teaching the younger generation that it's not all about you. Build your own skills to know yourself, but how do you wake up today and say, how can I help someone else today? Mm-hmm. How can I make a positive difference in someone else's life or even an organization?
Right.
That's so much harder than it seemed like it was when I was raising my child, who's now 29. You could tell, well, now that the younger generation are like 5, 6, 8, 12, there is a real expectation of ask and it is given. And on one hand, I love that. Wow, way to use your voice. And on the other hand, I'm like, when are you going to ask how my day was, right? And so one of the things that I'm grateful for is having access to a lot of generations. People in their 30s, 20s, teens, and younger are in my everyday or every week experience. And I love that. And I've noticed what you're talking about, Shaline, in that our younger, our kids are super entitled in ways that blow my mind. And I've noticed for myself an attitude, right? A certain tone. And I can tell that it does have an impact. It has an effect on the younger kids. It does not make them suddenly ask how I am or if they can do something. It just feels kind of bad because our youngest generation quite simply isn't used to being scolded or really told what to do in that way, how to engage. And so when you're talking about being kind to the generation just behind us, I think that's important too. When we talk about starting with why, sometimes I felt so many times in my life that if someone had just shown me, I would feel more confident, or I would be more like someone else I admire if I just had the chance. However, there was an innate desire to get that person if I did not have that person. And so I like you, started having mentors at a very young age. Mm-hmm. And now when we're looking at like giving back to the younger, we are the mentors. And in that regard, it is up to me. It's up to me personally to know the tenets of communication and then be kind about offering our parents whose younger kids are allowed to be with us to how to soften. Thanking them and praising them for their contribution with their young people, and then gently letting them know that you'd like to work together to inspire different behaviors. And then including a reward. These how-tos about how everyday communication has actual like levels or steps can be applied through every generation for a better intergenerational experience. It's all about developing relationships no matter what. And in every single case, knowing your audience or doing research on the person who's listening to you, the person you influence, is key. It's critical. And I am so glad to be talking about this now with some depth, because it is overlooked. And even when we're deeply engaged in it, it's a topic that rarely comes up.
Yeah. And parenting is hard to break into, right? Just like you were alluding to, Deanna, it's hard to, especially if your kids, like you and I have older kids. I mean, my daughter's right behind yours, 28 years old. But then I have younger kids. I have a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old, but that's not as young as Shaline's child, which is 9. It's really hard to talk to a parent, even if you've already traveled those roads, because the exposure of that 9-year-old is so much different than my 16-year-old, than that 19-year-old. And it's so hard to tell another parent, you know, here's an improvement idea, or have you considered, when their, you know, child is wilding out, or, you know, they're complaining to you for the 15th time about how they make these, you know, demands and whatnot. Because and every generation has done this, while we have complained about our kids and seem to be asking for parenting advice, we don't take it. We don't want to. You know, that whole "not my baby," you know, when the teacher calls and says your child is acting up, they don't even do that anymore, because they know the parents are going to say, "No, not my kid. Are you crazy? You know, I think I need to talk to the principal about you, teacher." Right.
Right. Yeah.
And there is a certain level of entitlement or protective parental blindness that is happening, that you don't see the truth about your child, and you did that, and that's why you don't want to see that. And so it is very hard, I have found, to speak into someone's parenting, even when they are screaming out for help. Right. So Shaline, what do you think about that? Because you're the youngest parent in here, or the parent of the youngest child in here. How do you feel about that? And
I totally hear what you're saying. I know that is out there and it is going on. I know that for me as a parent, I've always been like, I want to be better as a parent. My child didn't come with instructions. I took every parenting class I could get my hands on, and I'm currently taking a co-parenting class right now at a nonprofit, and I signed up yesterday because I was like, I need more tools. And I think it takes a parent to really humble themselves and take their ego out of the way. Like, I need to get out of my own way. And I cannot believe that I'm the best parent, or that I was raised by the best parent. But what can I do to be better equipped as a parent to become better for my children, for our next generation? And it starts with me modeling it. Right. It starts with me modeling respect, patience, and understanding and compassion. And a lot of the times I have to always self-reflect. And I always encourage parents that, you know, it's not that your shit don't stink. you gotta swallow your stuff and say, you know what, how can I be better for me and for others? But if I don't acknowledge that I have an issue or problem or that I'm not perfect, then we're never going to get anywhere. And I think that there's a lot of parents that have this attitude where it's so easy to put the walls up. It's so easy to put the walls up and not be vulnerable or not see the truth because we don't want to be criticized. And we forget that we have to surround ourselves in loving environments and cohorts that encourage constructive criticism. I open the door to my fellow sisters and other moms to say, you know what, Shaline, this is what worked for me. These are the struggles that I had. And I think that when we become more vulnerable as parents and say, look, I have a problem, I don't know how to solve this. How are you handling this with your children? And I learned from so many great mothers that said, you know what, I screwed up. I should have did it this way. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, thank God you shared that. Some women are scared to say that I'm a bad mom or that I'm making bad choices. I don't want to say that they're a bad parent. I don't think you're a bad parent. I think it's just that we're not equipped. Yeah. And if we get together and have a discussion about it and say, hey, I'm not perfect, but I want help. I want to be better if I can be better. And it's not about my ego and it's not about my pride. It's for us growing a better generation together and being accountable parents.
And there really are great friends, family members, groups now more than ever. So it's funny how we do talk often about what's not working in society or in leadership. And the reality is that's true. And there are resources available when we are ready. They just show up. When we pursue them, we find them, you know, and when we read. As a lot of times, especially in leadership or self-help books, the answers can be applied, the insights can be applied to every aspect of life or relationship. Yes, I love that you brought up the influences that you have found and made so that you can be vulnerable in your relationship as a parent.
Yeah, I mean, Shaline, you bring up such a good point with vulnerability. And, you know, it's true. It's almost like if we are vulnerable, we are judging ourselves as bad, which is not the role of vulnerability. Vulnerability is to say, I don't know something. Do you know something about that thing? Yeah. And gathering wisdom that could be right at your fingertips, you know. And I think too many people have a negative point of view when it comes to vulnerability. And, you know, thanks to Brene Brown, she's brought vulnerability back to the forefront of conversation and has made it not a bad word, but something to explore, something to play with and get curious about. And I love that you brought that up because I think you are absolutely right. We are in denial about the fact that it makes us feel vulnerable, makes us feel judged, makes us feel bad when we do things that produce bad behaviors in ourselves and our children. Because I believe, just like you, we don't have intentions to ruin our kids, you know, but like they say, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. Right? We can have all the good intentions we want, but if we don't follow it up with actual skill and wisdom, how do we get wisdom except by experience, or what I have found to be better than experience, borrowed experience? Ask someone else, read a book, you know, borrowed experience accelerates our learning, our application, right? Because now I don't have to play with fire to know that it's hot. You can tell me it's hot because you played with it, you know?
That's right.
And, you know, I think we're missing opportunities. And this is an age-old problem. It's just in our faces because we study it and we have access to the internet. We get information about bad behavior on many fronts all day long, right? Bad behavior, kids gone wild, and all these other things where parents are fighting, teachers and protecting criminal behavior of their children toward other adults. And it's those kinds of horrifying stories that bring our culture's attention to these problems without sharing solutions. That's what I hate about our fast news culture right now, is that sure, we share so many of the problems and then get all horrified and thinking that so many people are engaged in this behavior when it's actually not true.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think all kids are behaving this way. I think there are certain kids who are just making the news,
Yeah. Yeah. I always call CNN constant negative news.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, what are you focused on? I love those monkeys that are like, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, really protecting what's coming in and out of our minds and our hearts. And I think that we have to embrace more compassion for one another. We have to embrace more empathy for one another. And it's like the, teach one, lift one kind of concept. And I always encourage other parents or leaders that, do you have a mentee? Are you mentoring anybody? Are you impacting someone else's life?
Yeah.
Because I have the younger generation that it's like, look, we know that there's an issue and problem in our social society, but who is there to teach us and help us that's not so busy in their own world? And a lot of younger generation has told me that we don't even know that there's resources. We didn't know that we even that someone wants us to be around to learn.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing too, is another pillar in all of it is how can we be better leaders to reach out to our younger generation and say, hey, here's an opportunity to learn. Yeah. I would love to have you shadow or come along to this event and invite them and include them into the things that we're doing. Because I was a lone ranger for a long time. And like there's all these amazing people that are spread out, but wow, what a difference it makes if someone would have just invited me to tag along or invited me to shadow them, and I think we have to provide more opportunities for the younger generation to be included so they can learn, they can shadow, they can see like, wow, there are amazing leaders that are trying to pass the baton and they're trying to equip me to be better. Yeah. So that's, amazing.
Yeah. And I think you're right about that, just being open as an older generation to simply having the conversations first and building that trust, which will eventually allow you entree into their personal lives, because you have to have a whole lot of trust built up to talk about somebody's kids, right? Or even remotely touch upon the idea of parenting. Right? Because people are very touchy about that, and we're touchy because we're not sure. If people were more confident, they wouldn't care what you said.
Or maybe in a way to say it more gently. I think I've learned a lot about it's not what you say, it's how you said it. Yeah. I even know for me, like if you say it wrong in a wrong tone, I might take it wrong. Mm-hmm. But if I know that you're coming from a space of love and you say it in a way that's in a loving, kind fashion, then I'm more acceptable to it. So I think, prelimming your constructive criticism, opening up your heart space to say, hey, I'm really saying this out of love and a way for us just to grow together. Mm. And it's by all means not a way to offend anyone, but for me to just provide my own experience and resources or wisdom to help someone that's listening.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I love your heart on this. I love that you are concerned and you're actively working in your area of concern. What else do you want our listeners to know about what you're passionate about? Anything else?
I money and finance. You
And
know,
what
I think
about
that,
money and finance really gets you passionate, especially as we look at our culture today? What about that still is, because you've been in it for a while.
yeah,
So what keeps
I
you
came
passionate?
out of poverty. So I think, having my mom was, learning English as a second language. We grew up on welfare, and then she was able to work 2 to 3 jobs to support us. And then for myself, going through a lot of challenges in my life, of myself being in poverty and then having to come out of it, I had to learn the tools of working 2 to 3 jobs, and I still had no money at the end of the month. I wasn't saving anything. I didn't know anything about life insurance. I didn't know anything about burial and pre-need. I didn't know anything about retirement. And I think what's really important nowadays is, how do you get debt free? How do you not get debt and stay debt free? How do you save for a home? How do you build a retirement? How do you learn about taxes and taxation, and how that works as a business or as a personal finances? And we don't teach money and finances in our education system. And even though a lot of our younger generation is like, money, 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 it's all about money. To me, I think money is a tool, but it shouldn't encompass your whole life. And how do you build wealth with integrity? And as you build wealth with integrity, how do you educate yourself to prepare for devastating things in life? I learned so much about the pre-need and life insurance industry, about planning for burial early on and paying for it early on, learning how to do my health insurance properly, how to have a small business so then I could have tax deductions and file a Schedule C. So these things were really important. How to set up a, IRA, a Roth IRA for retirement. How do I have mutual funds? How do I invest in stocks? And so a lot of these things, we really should be educating ourselves and be a part of communities that will help us learn to be financially independent.
Right. Right. And
And
financially
sustainable.
responsible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so funny so you came about this because you struggled financially, both as a
Yeah.
child and then coming into your own employment and things like that. It's like, wow, I'm working so hard, but I'm not keeping any money. It's flowing right through my
Yeah. It's
hands.
going right through. I used to work 6 days a week, 16-hour days for over 10 years. And I had no savings. I had no retirement. I had no, and I didn't understand why. I thought that, if I worked hard, I could be successful. And no one taught me that how to save, how to build good credit. And so I think that it's so pivotal that we learn those things early on as possible, so we can be responsible stewards with our money.
Yeah. So what are one or two things that really got you flowing in this whole money, financial literacy concept? Because that's what we're talking about here. What were a couple triggers where you're like, oh, that's what I need to do? What were
Yeah.
a couple things for you that you can share with our listeners, especially since everybody struggles with money, and the concept of money?
Absolutely. I mean, I learned so much about, taxes. And, when I worked a W-2 or W-4 job, a regular job employee, reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad and allowing me to learn the 4 quadrants of how we make money in America was really a foundation for me. And then as I learned that, employees get taxed 30% on their tax, on their income, how do I take that 30% back from the government? Open a small business, even if it's a home-based business. So I always encourage people to find a passion and turn it into a business. Learn how to file a Schedule C every year so you can get that 30% back on your taxes. And then how do you establish life insurance for retirement? There's so many great avenues now that you can do living benefits now that, my dad had a stroke in his 40s. So that him having a stroke in his 40s really was devastating for us financially in the family, because all the money had to go to taking care of him, and he didn't have anything available for that. So, learning about how living benefits now can take money out of a life insurance to pay if you get sick, ill, or cancer, or illness, or disease is amazing. And also how to save for college savings fund inside of an insurance policy has been amazing nowadays. You can really grow children's college funds inside of a life insurance policy. And when they go to college to fill out a FAFSA form, it's not counted as an asset, and they can still qualify for all their grants and scholarships. I mean, that's a huge game changer for so many parents, where they can have a lot in one product. So, you know, educating and getting connected with financial advisors that are educated in that is really important. I'm always interviewing my accountants and financial advisors. Just because they have a title does not mean that they're educated in those resources. And so that's a huge thing, is also interviewing the professionals that you're working with to make sure that they're the right candidates to oversee your portfolio and to oversee your financial advisory needs.
Yeah, so true. What are so you talked about learning about taxes and learning how money works, because that's what Robert Kiyosaki talks about all the time. How does money work? Money works in a traditional employment scenario this way. Money works in a small business scenario this way. And so, you know, and then there's long-term money and short-term money. And I mean, I just love that, because there's so many people who don't know the game of taxes.
Right.
And that's where you lose all your money, because you're working your butt off, but giving half your money away. Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, depreciating assets versus assets that actually gain, because the fact of the matter is, in America, we're all one paycheck or one health crisis away from disaster.
Absolutely.
One paycheck or one health crisis. That's the average American. And, you know, I'm not too proud to say that I'm pretty average, you know?
Yeah.
But fortunately, we've made some good money moves, and that's all it is. Nobody needs to be rich to employ anything you just talked about. It takes $0 to learn about how your taxes work.
Yes. Absolutely.
So yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that, because if we're going to look out for the next generation, we need to let them know how money works, especially since we're growing up in the United States. You know, everything's getting tighter, everything's more expensive. It doesn't matter, you know, especially coming out of the pandemic. It's interesting. You can go anywhere now and prices have, you know, at least grown by half. You know, if it was $10, it's now $15, right? Gas, everything you can think about, you know, has gotten more expensive. So how do, you know, and nobody's salary went up by 50% during that time. You know, some people have lost their income. And so
you saw a lot of small businesses close during this pandemic, you know. It's unfortunate when you have hardworking Americans that are running small businesses and a pandemic hits and wipes them out.
Yeah.
What are they to do now? Yeah. And you're having jobs that are paying minimum wage or low, you know, and you're living in a state of California that is extremely high to live in. How do we make better money choices? And how do we take a little bit of our money and allow it to invest it in the right direction?
Yeah. Yeah, and not live with a poverty mindset, you know, but more with knowing that there's abundance, that, you know, financial blessing is coming with diligence, because you're right. It takes a trickle of money at a time to create a savings. I mean, I was somebody with absolutely no reason to have a savings, but I did. And I ended up having, you know, a good amount of money whenever I had crisis. You know, crisis could be something as little as, oh my gosh, I gotta get, you know, my car repaired. Well, everybody on the face of the planet, especially in the United States, knows a car repair could be $100. It could be $5,000 real quick, you know, and that'll wipe you out. And, you know, with the state of healthcare, we never know when we're going to be one injury away from not being able to work, having a high medical bill or bills, and, you know, small trickles paying yourself first is the most important money concept that I ever heard. You know, my mom
Yeah.
always told me, I don't care that you make a little bit of money. Pay yourself first, put it in that savings so you don't ever have to look at it. And that is
Yeah,
just
our our family did an IUL, an Index Universal Life Group with National Life Group with living benefits. That's what our family did. Our family also got pre-need. We found out with so many funerals in our family and friends, we found out that the funeral industry goes up 13% every year. And you can actually get a pre-need plan and plan your funeral, pay it in advance, monthly small payments over the course of 5 to 10 years, so that in the event if anything ever happened, we would have all of those expenses paid for, and we're not taking from family members that have worked so hard that are maybe 1 or 2 paychecks away from devastation.
Yeah.
So doing little things like that, and also all of our children in our family, we put college savings plans inside of their index universal life policies, where it grows with a mutual fund with the index, and it's all money that is tax free when they get older, and they can use that money for college or a wedding or whatever they need. And all of that money that grew in there, we didn't have to pay taxes on it. And so that's what's great is learning, you know, what are taxable income and non-taxable income, and how to invest it in Roth IRAs, you know, being able to put away a retirement plan little by little every month, even if it's $20 or $50, $100 a month, little by little every month, and it just staying there and saving there for retirement. So then you can retire with dignity and have money, and you're not in poverty when you're retiring.
Yeah. And young is when you start, because that's when all of these policies cost less, and
super cheap.
Yeah. Yeah. It's super inexpensive. I started mine when I was 23, and, you know, it was super cheap. I think it was like $17 a month to have a decent life insurance policy at that point. And, you know, $17, we spend more on lunch these days. And so, you know, it's a matter of perspective. And I think the more we talk about financial literacy and the importance of knowing about your money, the more our young people will understand that, oh, maybe I should be starting to put away money when I don't even feel it, like when I'm earning in high school.
Yeah.
That's when a money habit gets created, right? And doing
I learned from Deanna. Deanna used to talk about being financially solvent. And I love that, Deanna. I remember when you talked about, she taught me how do we become financially solvent? And how do we be good stewards of the assets that we have? And how do we put money to work for us? Because we're working so hard for that money.
Right. Right, exactly. And that is a principle that never goes away. You are going to work hard for your money, but will your money work hard for you? And that's really important. Well, Deanna, anything to add here? We've gone all over the place with you know, parenting and being vulnerable and financial literacy. Jump in here, because I know you always have some great thoughts as well.
My heart is beating while I was listening to this, because it is so on brand with Simon Sinek's rules of conduct and the golden circle when you start with why. You know, the what is on the far outside of the circle. And that's us as parents, as leaders. The how came out all over the place in tonight's discussion, with communication and with listening as an asset to communication and to connection. And then with financial literacy. Why? Because the children are our future, or the intergenerational fulfillment of creating bonds that have an impact generationally. So I'm over here remembering also when Shaline was a pop the trunk kind of teenager. She's grown into this very savvy businesswoman, but I remember when she got turned on to Robert Kiyosaki and had like a case of books in the trunk. And whenever she would see you, did I give you the book? Do you understand the principles? It's the 4 concepts. It makes it so simple. And it also made me think about that movie, The Secret. So when it very first came out, it was like a movement. And I wonder how old Shaline was. I mean, still an adult, but still young. And of course, popping the trunk and offering the 4-disc set to everyone. And so I just am really enlightened to recall that when I was first getting into mentorship, those principles were not just enjoyed, or like they didn't just turn a light bulb on. This particular professional that we have as our guest today, but she created a lifestyle with it, and now is talking to us some 10 or 15 years later in ways that are game-changing, life-changing, right? Your authenticity, Shaline, and your dedication to what you believe in is truly awe-inspiring. What a treat to have you with us this evening. And to have joined our community.
Yes.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It was a pleasure having you on our show today. Anything else you want to tell our audience? Either because you're in the financial advising game, do you want to give a contact, email or website that you manage for people to get in contact with you or know more information?
Yeah, I'm Googleable, so you can find me on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram. I usually just go by Shaline Jane, and SHA and Align, LINE Jane. And it's so I'm searchable. I get emails all the time or just messages. My phone number is pretty public too, and so I'm more than happy to. I do a lot of speaking engagements, so a lot of people will request for me to come out and speak to their organization and do lunch and learns, and I provide food, and we really get a chance to just talk about these topics at a deeper level and answer some nitty-gritty questions, so then people can be prepared. And I usually bring in big guns that have a wealth of experience too, so then it's just not me talking, it's also other professionals that are really just professionals in their area and are like the brains of it. So I love to be able to showcase them as well. And I really believe it's working together. You don't got to know everything, but if you surround yourself with amazing people that do, you can go far. And I'm a product of just standing on the shoulders of giants. And, I love being in communities like this. So thank you for the opportunity. And I think if I could just leave off with anything is, serve with gratitude and compassion, and get out of your comfort zone, meet more people, connect with more people. You have everything that you need. There's an expert out there for everything. If you have a problem in life, it's just, are you willing enough to step out of your comfort zone and say, hey, I want to make a difference in my life. I want to change the next generation. You're pivoting in the direction that you want to go, and surrounding yourself with positive people to just keep you going. Like, I'm thankful for Deanna and you, because it allows me to confirm that I'm in a right place, and that I have community, that I can be vulnerable and I can say, hey, I don't know everything. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And so I love that we can do this. And so I really appreciate from the bottom of my heart for having me. I'm more than happy to serve my community. And if you're listening to this, feel free to reach out. I would love to connect with you.
Thank you so much, Shaline. I couldn't have ended our show better than that. So we're going to sign off, and this is JaneTaff the Sage.
Deanna Vessel, your career catalyst.
And our special guest, Shaline Jane, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
See you next time. Thank you. God bless.